Have you ever looked at the financial news and thought to yourself, how can the stock market be this high when life out here keeps getting harder? I still remember one morning not long ago, I opened my laptop and the Dow Jones was soaring. The NASDAQ hit another record high. Every major headline in America was celebrating. The market is booming. But then I stepped outside and saw a completely different picture. People working longer hours than ever just to keep the lights on. Families juggling rent, groceries, and credit card debt. Small shops closing down, for rent signs gathering dust on empty storefronts. Nothing about that looked like prosperity. That was the moment I realized what we call growth in the stock market no longer reflects real life. It's become an elegant illusion, a distorted mirror showing numbers rising while people sink deeper into struggle. You see, there was a time when we believed that a rising stock market meant a strong economy, but that connection has been shattered. Today, the market dances while millions of Americans drown in debt, anxiety, and uncertainty about the future. I've worked in economics and employment for more than 2 decades, and I can tell you this with complete honesty. We are living in the most artificial economy in modern history. Money used to be tied to something real, gold. But when the U.S. abandoned the gold standard, money stopped representing anything tangible. It became numbers, printed or created on a screen whenever a crisis hit. After 2008, this became the norm. The government called it quantitative easing. It sounds sophisticated, but it simply means printing money with a few clicks of a mouse. And that money, instead of reaching the people, flowed upward, to banks, to corporations, to those who were already wealthy. I call it the inverted pyramid of trust, where money rises to the top instead of trickling down to the roots. The people who touched that new money first bought stocks, bonds, real estate, driving asset prices through the roof. By the time that money trickled down to ordinary families, everything was already more expensive. Food, housing, energy, and somehow those struggling at the bottom ended up paying for someone else's prosperity. I remember talking to a laid-off factory worker from Michigan. He smiled bitterly and said, "I don't get how they say the U.S. economy is doing great. I lost my job, and my daughter's working too just to cover rent." That's not an isolated story. That's a portrait of America today. Meanwhile, companies like Nvidia and Tesla are valued at trillions of dollars. Tiny microchips and sleek electric cars are now worth more than the economies of entire nations. But ask yourself, do they feed anyone? Do they make it easier for families to buy homes or afford health care? Don't get me wrong, I admire technology and innovation. But when a single company is valued higher than a whole real economy, something is deeply off. We've lost our sense of what real value means. We've begun worshiping numbers instead of substance. The financial world today feels like a grand performance, glittering, spectacular, but hollow underneath. And the most dangerous part? Everyone knows it's an illusion, but we keep clapping anyway, afraid that if we stop, the stage will collapse. I've seen this play before, during the dot-com bubble, the 2008 housing crash, and now the AI-driven asset frenzy. Each time people say, this time is different, but history doesn't repeat. It rhymes wearing a different mask. What troubles me most is this. When people begin believing in illusions more than reality, they lose the ability to tell what's real. The stock market is not the economy. Stock prices are not a measure of society's health. And money, whether paper or digital, is not the definition of prosperity. True prosperity comes from creating, building, and contributing. It comes from meaningful work, from the belief that effort will be rewarded, and from a system that honors human value, not just market value. But right now it feels like we've forgotten that. And that's where the great illusion of our time begins. When the world chooses to believe in numbers on a screen instead of the reality cracking beneath its feet. When I talk about the financial illusion, people often ask me, why do you call it an illusion? Isn't it a good thing when the stock market goes up? It's a fair question. But to understand it, we need to look deeper, not at the lines on a chart, but at how the system itself is being fed. You see, for decades, every time the U.S. economy hit a crisis, in 2000, in 2008, in 2020? The response from central banks was always the same. Inject more money into the system. They called it quantitative easing. It sounds smart, technical, even elegant. But at its core, it's just creating money out of thin air. This new money isn't born from work, production, or innovation. It's born from policy decisions. And when that money flows into the economy, it doesn't go to you or me. The workers, teachers, small business owners, or engineers trying to feed a family. It flows upward, to Wall Street, to corporations with access to credit, to investors who can borrow at near zero interest rates. And that's when the bubble begins to form. I've sat in boardrooms where CEOs discussed buying back their own stock instead of investing in new equipment, research, or jobs. Why? Because when they buy back their own shares, the price goes up, and on paper they look richer. No new products, no new hires. Just one click, and the company appears to be growing. That's the illusion of wealth, a picture painted with artificial profits instead of real value. I still remember visiting a factory in Ohio back in 2019 when the U.S. market was at its peak. Half the production line had stopped. Workers feared layoffs. One of them told me, "The market's up big, but we don't see any of it. No raises, no extra shifts, just more rumors about cuts." And he was right, because the real economy, the one where people work and goods are made, is not where the new money goes. Cheap money creates addiction, an addiction to debt, to fast profits, to the comforting belief that markets will never fall. We've lived in this era of easy money for more than a decade, and like any addiction, it numbs us to reality. When interest rates are near zero, companies borrow billions without thinking twice. Governments spend freely. Investors throw money at anything. Stocks, bonds, even worthless assets. There was even a time when people bought shares of a company simply because its name sounded like another famous startup. That's how illusions spread. Not through lies, but through blind faith. Faith that everything will keep going up. But here's the thing. Every system built on faith has limits. When inflation returns, when gas, food, and housing prices surge higher than ever, people realize that this magic money didn't create real wealth. It only drove up the cost of living while wages stood still. And then, to save the market again, policymakers do the only thing they know: print more money. I'm not saying monetary policy is the enemy, but I do believe we've abused it. When every crisis is solved with cheap money, people forget how to create real value. Companies stop competing through innovation. They compete through debt. Investors stop studying a company's fundamentals. They just ask, will the Fed keep printing? And young people today? Many think investing simply means buying a token, waiting for the price to rise and selling. We've stopped investing in the future and started gambling on fantasy. You know what worries me most? Not the crash, because every bubble eventually bursts. What worries me is what happens after. When faith in money, in markets, and in fairness breaks down, society begins to fracture. Young people start believing that hard work no longer matters. The middle class feels betrayed. And when that happens, no system, no matter how powerful, can stand for long. Because in the end, the economy isn't just numbers on a screen. It's built on trust between people. Trust that honesty, effort, and real work still have value. If we lose that, then no matter how brightly the stock ticker glows, the economy itself is already going dark. I know what I've shared today isn't easy to hear, because this isn't just about money or the markets. It's about trust. The trust that what we work for, what we sacrifice for, still means something. But here's the truth. Every illusion, no matter how sophisticated, has its limits. A bubble can keep growing, but at some point, even the slightest touch can make it burst. And when that happens, there will be pain, loss, and yes, awakening. People often ask me, so when will it collapse? And I always tell them, no one knows. Because what we're facing isn't just an economic problem. It's a human one. It's about greed, fear, and the blind belief that growth can last forever. But I also believe that when the fog of illusion lifts, what remains will be real value. Real in our work, real in our creativity, real in the way we treat one another. The financial world may crumble, but people, we rebuild. We always have, because in the end, the economy isn't numbers flashing on a screen. It's the hands that build, the minds that think, and the hearts that keep hoping. Maybe the so-called Great Reset isn't a conspiracy at all. Maybe it's a reminder that it's time to return to what truly matters. Real value, real labor, real humanity. And I believe that if each of us begins by understanding this system better, by daring to ask questions, by facing the truth head on, then even if the illusion falls apart, we can build something stronger, fairer, and more human in its place. Because in the end, the economy is only a mirror of who we are. If we become real, the economy will too. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. If what I've shared resonated with you, leave a comment below. Tell me what you see happening in our economy right now. And don't forget to hit subscribe, not just to follow a channel, but to join a movement that seeks truth and real value in a world full of illusions. See you in the next video, where we'll talk about how to protect yourself and rebuild a truly sustainable financial future.